The room went silent the moment the words left his mouth. According to emotional commentary circulating online, Traci Braxton's son spoke from a place of grief, not accusation, not evidence, but belief shaped by loss. He didn't say doctors were wrong. He didn't deny medical reality. What he did was something far more unsettling. He described a spiritual narrative he believes surrounded his mother's suffering, one rooted in fear, folklore, and years of unresolved family tension. The phrase black magic didn't land as a literal claim of murder. It landed as a symbol, a way to explain pain that never made sense, a way to give language to a feeling that something dark, emotional, spiritual, psychological, had been circling his mother long before her health declined. And then another name entered the conversation: Evelyn Braxton. Not as a criminal, not as a cause of death, but as a powerful presence whose control, conflict, and long-standing family pressure were described as spiritually destructive. What shook people wasn't the idea of magic. It was the idea that grief sometimes reaches for symbolism when reality feels unbearable. Because when someone loses a parent, logic doesn't always survive, but emotion does. And once that emotional truth is spoken publicly, the fallout doesn't wait for clarification. To understand why this moment resonated so deeply, you have to understand the language of grief, especially the kind that follows a long, public illness. Traci Braxton battled cancer in the public eye, a fight marked by courage, exhaustion, and relentless emotional strain. For her family, the loss wasn't sudden. It was drawn out, layered with hope and heartbreak in equal measure. Her son, Kevin Surratt Jr., has spoken about grief in ways that aren't clinical, they're symbolic. When he referenced black magic, listeners close to the family say it wasn't a literal accusation of sorcery or foul play. It was a metaphor, a way to describe the invisible weight his mother carried: stress, conflict, unresolved pain, and the feeling that something dark hovered over her spirit during her final years. That symbolism matters because families often reach for spiritual language when medical explanations feel incomplete to the heart. Cancer explains the body. It doesn't always explain the why that grief demands. For Kevin Jr., the idea of black magic gave shape to a sense of spiritual depletion, the belief that constant emotional battles can drain a person long before the body gives out. This is where the family dynamic becomes part of the story. Evelyn Braxton, as the matriarch, has long represented authority, discipline, and control within the family. Over the years, viewers have watched tension flare and settle, often without resolution. For some family members, that environment felt stabilizing. For others, it felt suffocating. In grief narratives, powerful figures can become symbols. Not villains, symbols. Kevin Jr.'s words, as interpreted by supporters, framed Evelyn not as a cause of illness, but as a source of emotional gravity. The claim wasn't that she caused harm intentionally. It was that years of pressure, conflict, and unresolved strain can feel spiritually corrosive when layered onto physical illness. The backstory also includes the public nature of the family's pain. Traci's struggles weren't private. They were filtered through cameras, commentary, and expectations. That exposure can magnify stress, making every disagreement heavier. For a son watching his mother endure both illness and family tension, it's not surprising that grief would seek a narrative that explains everything at once. Importantly, no medical professional, authority, or verified source has suggested anything supernatural caused Traci's death. The language here reflects belief and symbolism, not evidence. But belief, in the aftermath of loss, is powerful. It shapes memory. It shapes meaning. And once spoken publicly, it shapes reaction. That's why this moment felt explosive. It wasn't about facts. It was about how grief chooses its words. Some choose data. Others choose faith. Others choose metaphor. Kevin Jr.'s choice resonated because it named something many feel but rarely articulate: that emotional environments can feel just as lethal as disease, even when they aren't. Because grief doesn't always speak in diagnoses. Sometimes it speaks in symbols, trying to make sense of a loss that never feels fair. And once that symbolic language enters the public conversation, It changes how the past is remembered and how the family must now respond. The main conflict ignited the moment grief was interpreted as accusation. When Kevin Surratt Jr. spoke about black magic, parts of the internet rushed to translate symbolism into blame. What he framed as a spiritual explanation for emotional suffering was quickly reframed by outsiders as a literal allegation, one that pointed fingers instead of expressing pain. That translation is where the conflict truly began. On one side stood Kevin Jr.'s grief.
Raw.
Unprocessed. Searching for language that could hold both loss and unanswered questions. On the other stood a public audience trained to read headlines literally, stripping nuance from words that were never meant to be forensic. The collision between those two realities turned a personal expression into a public controversy. The conflict deepened because of history. The Braxton family's tensions have long been visible, even when softened for television. Years of unresolved disagreements, emotional distance, and power struggles created a backdrop where symbolic language could easily be misunderstood. When Kevin Jr. connected his mother's suffering to something dark, many listeners, already primed by years of on-screen conflict, assumed he meant someone, not something. That's where Evelyn Braxton became the center of interpretation. Not through a direct claim, but through implication layered onto her role as matriarch. Supporters of Evelyn argued the narrative was unfair, turning grief into an indictment. Others believed Kevin Jr. was naming a truth about emotional environments, how control, conflict, and pressure can feel spiritually destructive over time. The conflict wasn't about medicine or mysticism. It was about meaning. What does it mean when a son says his mother was spiritually harmed? Is he accusing a person or describing a system that weighed on her? The lack of clarity allowed the loudest interpretations to dominate. Then came the first shocking twist. People close to the family clarified that Kevin Jr.'s words were never meant as a literal explanation of death. The twist was realizing the phrase black magic functioned as symbolic shorthand for prolonged emotional strain, a way to describe how constant stress, unresolved conflict, and public pressure can feel like a curse when layered onto serious illness. That reframing flipped the story. If the language was metaphorical, then the outrage was misdirected. The conflict wasn't about an accusation, it was about how grief is allowed to speak. Kevin Jr. wasn't claiming causation. He was expressing how it felt to watch his mother suffer in an environment he believed drained her spirit. This twist exposed a deeper issue: the internet's discomfort with symbolic language in moments of loss. Grief often borrows from spirituality to express what facts cannot. But when audiences demand literal interpretations, symbolic grief gets punished for not sounding like a press release. The conflict escalated anyway. Headlines flattened nuance. Reaction videos chose certainty over care. Kevin Jr.'s emotional vocabulary was treated like evidence rather than expression. And once that happened, every past family tension was reinterpreted through a darker lens. Behind the scenes, the emotional toll grew. Supporters worried Kevin Jr.'s grief was being exploited. Critics insisted words have consequences. Both sides missed the core truth. Grief doesn't arrive pre-edited for public consumption. Because when symbolic pain is mistaken for accusation, the real injury isn't reputational. It's the silencing of grief that doesn't know how else to speak. The first shocking twist wasn't about supernatural claims. It was about realizing the controversy itself was built on a misunderstanding, one that turned a son's attempt to name suffering into a spectacle. And once that misinterpretation took hold, the story was primed to escalate again, drawing in public judgment, reopening old wounds, and setting up a second twist that would force everyone to confront a harder question: who gets to decide how grief should sound? The escalation didn't come from Kevin Jr. saying more. It came from everyone else refusing to slow down. Once the phrase black magic was lifted from its emotional context, the internet turned it into a headline weapon. Blogs stripped away grief and replaced it with accusation. Reaction channels exaggerated symbolism into certainty. The story stopped being about a son mourning his mother and became a public trial about blame, legacy, and power inside the Braxton